Well, ladies and gentlemen, buongiorno a tutti. That's my perfect Italian, as you can see. No, it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Governor Visco, Salvatore, Alberto, the other colleagues for IVASS for the invitation. I think it's the third conference, and I'm always in here, so I'm really privileged to be requested to come to Rome. And of course, it's always fantastic to come and to discuss with you the relevant issues about the insurance sector. It is already the third year of this Solvency II conference, and it's also the third year of implementation of Solvency II, in place now, of course, all over the European Union. And undoubtedly, this was the biggest change to insurance regulation framework in the sector in the latest years. This regulatory change brought a number of positive elements to the insurance industry. I would say in particular the better alignment of capital to the risks that are incurred, much more stronger focus on risk management and governance, and also an increased transparency of the sector. But a big regulatory change like Solvency II needs to be appropriately monitored to really understand what are the areas and the particular issues that deserve further reflection in order to maintain it fit for purpose and achieve the objectives of policyholder protection and market stability. That's why we have the Solvency II reviews. Furthermore, these objectives can only be achieved by ensuring that the regulatory regime is implemented consistently and that we achieve a high degree of supervisory convergence. So in my intervention today, I'll concentrate on these two elements, the Solvency II review and supervisory convergence. Starting with the Solvency review. Already last year, as Salvatore mentioned it, EIOPA started and advised the EU Commission on possible targeted adjustments, looking at, of course, to remove some levels of complexity, increase proportionality, removing some technical inconsistencies, and updating calibrations where that was necessary. We are happy to see that most of our advice has been taken by the European Commission in their own draft proposals. Most, Natalie, not all. Now it's time to work on the second review, the 2021 review. And at EIOPA, we believe that this review should ensure that Solvency II is adapted to the new market conditions, but without fundamentally change the basic principles of the risk-based regime. I would say that this review should be more an evolution than a revolution. Let me mention a few areas that we will work on for the 2021 review. First, the long-term guarantee measures. As it was mentioned, of course, this is one of the most important parts of the review. It is envisaged in the directive itself. And we will, of course, be looking at all the elements in this LTG, including the volatility adjustment, which is, of course, particularly relevant for the Italian market. We will revisit the design and the calibration in line of the experience collected. And let me just mention my view that I think it is possible to fine-tune these measures in order to ensure that they work properly under different market conditions. Secondly, the treatment of long-term illiquid liabilities and the assets that back them. This is an area where definitely EIOPA has already started to do some work. I believe that we can have a better fine-tuned treatment of truly long-term insurance liabilities and the assets that back these liabilities. Some work needs to be done in this area. Thirdly, the reporting and public disclosure requirements. We need to look at them to ensure that they continue to be relevant and proportionate. And in this area, I also believe that there's a need to go deeper, and I believe that we can make some adjustments. Fourth, the supervisory tools and measures to reinforce the macroprudential nature of Solvency II. We all know that Solvency II, as this was designed as a micro regime, a micro-prudential regime, it already includes some measures which have, of course, a macro prudential effect, but we also believe that we need to put it in a comprehensive way, and there are still some tools and some measures that will benefit to include in Solvency II from a macroprudential nature. And finally, number 5, the way sustainability is considered within Solvency II. We just received last week a request from the European Commission to take a look at how sustainability is considered within Solvency II in all the 3 pillars, and we will, of course, go deeper in this area. We will wait, of course, for the request that the European Commission will send to us overall on the Solvency II review. That probably should come beginning next year, but we are already starting and doing our work in these different areas. Let me now touch the points about supervisory convergence. In a single market, which is what we have, and we should be proud of it in Europe, of course, there are cross-border activities and the passport system that is supervised by the home country. So in this internal market, supervision is only as strong as its weakest link. And this is a lesson that we need to take into consideration. And that's why ensuring high quality and consistent supervision is fundamental to the proper functioning of the single market. The Solvency II harmonized regulatory framework creates, in my opinion, the perfect conditions for this supervisory convergence. There is not any more excuses that the rules are different in different countries in order to achieve high quality, consistent supervision throughout Europe. So EIOPA has been devoting high priority to supervisory convergence and has been actively working to foster a common European supervisory culture and ensure consistent supervisory practices. But this is a marathon. It's not a 100 meters race. In April, we published our 2018-2019 Supervisory Convergence Plan, in which we identified 3 main areas of work. Firstly, the development of common supervisory tools and benchmarks, focusing in the supervision of internal models, and quite relevantly also on the supervisory assessment of conduct risks. We're not talking only about prudential supervision, we're also talking about, very importantly, about conduct supervision. The second priority, the supervision of cross-border businesses, namely through activities to detect unsustainable business models doing business cross-border in Europe, the sufficiency of technical provisions in the context of cross-border provision of services, and also the analysis of fit and proper when cross-border business is going on. Finally, the third priority, the supervision of emerging risks. Areas like supervisory practices on IT resilience and cyber risks, the usage of big data, and last but not least, of course, the supervision of what happens with Brexit. In particular, EIOPA has been building up and coordinating the so-called cooperation platforms with the home and the host supervisors to look at concrete cases of companies with cross-border activities and their supervision. Since last year, we have already put in place 14 platforms with, I would say, excellent results in terms of increased exchange of information between supervisors and coordinated measures taken to protect consumers and mitigate detriment. These platforms allow the EIOPA to better assess the supervisory practices and the business models going on. A number of problematic business areas have been identified. Construction and statutory risks insurance in France, suretyship and medical malpractice in Italy, complex and risk unit linked throughout Europe. Our focus on making sure that these activities that are done cross-border are well supervised will continue. And this is a fundamental part, as I said, of making sure that the single market works for all consumers throughout Europe. We will be pretty attentive in the coming months to technical provisions in the area of these insurance contracts that I mentioned, and also on the conduct risks, for example, related to complex and risky unit-linked business that is sold through cross-border business throughout Europe. The focus on supervisory convergence activities by EIOPA is also reflected in a growing number of peer reviews. We will publish in the coming days the results and the recommendations to the national competent authorities on the way that supervise key functions of Solvency II system of governance. But also it's reflected in the increased number of mediation cases and breaches of union law investigations. But this increased work on supervisory convergence also reveals the current limitations of EIOPA's powers and tools, which should undoubtedly be reinforced in the current review of the ESA's regulations. I'm talking concretely about ensuring a strong framework for EIOPA's independent assessment of national supervisory practices and further powers and preventive tools regarding cross-border business, including the assessment of fitness and propriety of shareholders and board members of companies that are willing to predominantly operating cross-border. Ladies and gentlemen, by reviewing the Solvency II framework and taking concrete steps on supervisory convergence, we will ensure that the EU insurance sector will be properly regulated and supervised and ready to face the huge challenges of economic and political uncertainty, of digitalization, and of climate change. A sector that will use innovation to benefit consumers. A sector that will be instrumental in closing societal gaps like the pensions gap and the protection gap. And the role of insurers in the pan-European personal pension product, the PEP, will be fundamental. We are quite happy to see the development of the PEP file at European legislators' table. The Parliament recently had an opinion on this, and we believe that we should get the PEP out there for the benefit of all European consumers. But also the role of insurers in the protection gap on natural catastrophes should be increased. We have a huge gap in this area all over Europe. I'm coming from a country where, like in Italy, there's a huge risk on seismic activity, and we don't have solutions as a society to protect us against these risks. Insurance can help. It's not a silver bullet, but it can help to solve these solutions. Something needs to be made on this. But a sector also that will use its underwriting and investment activities to foster a gradual transition to a low-carbon economy. And in here, I would say that what we need, it's not a kind of a 0-1 approach where some activities or some investments are considered full green and others are considered full brown. What we need is a way for the sector to help this transition, to give the right incentives through underwriting and through investment to foster a gradual change that will avoid instability in the markets. A sector that will do all of this, applying the highest ethical values, treating customers friendly, and by that, gaining their trust. Solvency II, ladies and gentlemen, it is a landmark that we should be proud of as Europeans. It is up to all of us to continue to make it a success. Thank you very much.